We recently published the Trials at Home final recommendations on the website. I hope you all had a look at it before the meeting. We will not show them to you all one by one, that's quite a lot, but we will discuss some of them with you in a bit more detail, which hopefully encourages you to dig deeper and have a good look at the website. So before we dig into the recommendations, we want to talk about how we got to those recommendations. So Trials at Home started almost 6 years ago with the goal to provide those recommendations on decentralization of clinical trial approaches. At that time, we really thought we need to convince people that decentralization may be a good innovation to work on. And then COVID hit us and no one needed to be convinced anymore, but we needed to figure out how to do that. So basically, we looked into how can we move clinical trial activities to participants' home rather than them coming to a clinical site, right? That's what decentralization is all about. And very often we do that making use of technologies. You can have a decentralized trial without technologies. It's becoming more and more rare. So we focused a lot on the technological and operational solutions to facilitate those activities at home. So we didn't do that alone. Kim, already I see Megan sitting there. Kim already talked about that. We, over the course of the project, we had 35 partners working with us, collaborating, and then a lot of external people also. We had our great patient expert panel working with us throughout the project. We had an external stakeholder panel and many interactions with other stakeholders to get to where we are today. And we had an approach which was like a multi-angle approach. So we looked at the decentralization of clinical trials from all these different angles. We looked at what has been done already and what can we learn from that. We looked at what is technologically possible and where are the challenges still. We looked at what is allowed within the regulatory landscape, within what is requested and what is looked for within the different stakeholder groups. And then we did a proof of concept trial to actually try out 7 decentralized elements in practice. So we also moved from the theory really to the practice of doing such a trial and seeing what that brought us, again, together with this multi-stakeholder collaboration. And within that, and I must say AI helped me a little bit here, so don't pin me down on the exact numbers, but we used around 8 different types of research methods, from systematic review, semi-structured interviews, focus groups, surveys, a Delphi study, a patient preference study, and the proof of concept trial. We utilized all of them to uncover different aspects of decentralization of clinical trials. Again, involving all these different stakeholders in the field, which to date led to 27 scientific publications. I didn't look this morning, we're expecting one this week, and more to come over the next couple of months, with over 60 unique authors providing their expertise, and many more people behind that within the consortium working with us on these projects. And you can see that these are not all the publications that came out, just a selection of different publications, and there should have been more. And with that, we came to these final recommendations that are now on the website. And I'll hand over to Kim, who will show you a little bit more about them.
So a little bit more about the website and where you can find information. And I think Mira just said many stakeholders were involved in the preparation of the recommendations, and that's how we see the recommendations being used and implemented. So if you could just click the Our Recommendations drop-down box. We won't go to these areas quite yet, but you can see here that first off, healthcare providers, industry sponsors, trialists, patients, regulators. So we're hoping to really have a number of recommendations that can be useful to a wide variety of stakeholders. And maybe I'll just go through sort of a little bit more in detail where you can find content. So we've broken the recommendations down into sort of theme areas. You can see those right there at the drop-down box with activities and operations, impact and KPIs, patient considerations and involvement. And if you click into one of them, this is, and if you click maybe down to the DCT approaches, because you could see that box. So you can dig into an area. So this is the activities. It's a little bit slow to load, sorry for that. But if you go down to, maybe if you pick the home shipment and collection, you get a little bit more information immediately. You can drill down more. And then you'll find, go ahead and go to the home shipment and collection. A couple of things once you drill into the actual recommendations. You'll find a landing page where you can see the major recommendations. As you click on those little yellow arrows, you'll see more information. And then if you scroll further down to the bottom of the page, every page will have further reading. And so you'll see the full publication list that's there. And on some pages, there's actually links to other information as well. So maybe if we go back to the home page, there are a couple of other areas that I wanted to highlight. If you just scroll down, we did try to consolidate into all of the information into a very discrete set of main recommendations. We sort of think of these as the overarching recommendations. They're a little bit high level, but again, as you drill down into the different themes, you can go into as much detail as you want and really dig into as much of the research and the publications and the additional reading that you'd like. So then, if you can go right back up to the top of the website, I just want to cover the navigation bar that's at the top. So we have a space that's about trials at home. And if you just scroll over, you can see there's a description of trials at home, what's a clinical trial, what's a decentralized clinical trial, and you can also find more information about the radial study, right? So that was the pilot study that was done right in the middle of trials at home. There are a number of courses, so if you just scroll over that bar, we don't need to click down, but you can see there's a number of DCT courses that will be available. And then the next bar over, if you just hover over, is all of the materials. So again, you can get to the materials through separate pages, or we have a glossary, a full listing of all the publications, and a full listing of all of the deliverables. And then maybe one last point I'll make, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the site. Again, another navigation bar that covers the same material. Thank you very much for the scrolling. That was good.
So while people are getting settled in, so what we asked of our panelists is that they introduce themselves. We asked them to pick one of the recommendations that we are providing as trials at home, and then introduce themselves, stating why they think that's an important recommendation. We first asked them to pick the most important one. That seemed to be impossible. So then we went to just pick one that you think is really important. So what we'll be doing, we'll show the recommendations on the slides, and we'll ask you to introduce yourself together with the recommendation. Helga?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Helga Gardarsdottir. I'm a professor at Utrecht University, and within the Trials at Home project, I was the academic lead for work package 4, EGO, which focused on regulatory, ethical, legal, and GCP aspects. So it's not a surprise that this beautiful tile and this recommendation is something that I picked. And I've thought about it quite a lot because we have been thinking about what's the value of this project, what can we take home from it, and what are the quick wins. And harmonizing regulations across member states is not something new. We've been talking about this for a long time. But we also really understand that that doesn't really happen easy or quickly, and there's a lot of stakeholders that are involved in to get to achieve that. And thinking then with that in mind, while we wait for this harmonization, which we all, I think, want to happen, what I thought about could be something important as a milestone towards that is really helping providing this insight into these national variations. I know early on in the project we spent considerable amount of time just to understanding the landscape and what we were able and unable to do with regards to DC elements. And we were so happy when the recommendations came from the HMA-EMA on DC elements, specifically the appendix on national provisions, which provided this country-specific overview, which was very useful. So my reflections are really, while we wait for this to happen slowly, it would be very valuable if we would have regular updates of these national provisions, just to help in the organization and implementation of DC elements in clinical trials. Thanks.
Thank you, Helga. Very clear statement. So we ask all of the panelists to provide their statement first, and then, so keep your questions, because next step is that we'll come back to you for a discussion on it. So Sten.
Okay, so I go next. Yeah, welcome also from my side to this very nice location. My name is Sten Hanke. I was working as I was the scientific lead of the technical work package, so I was overseeing the technical selection and the performance from technology side in the trial in radial. I work as an associate professor in Austria, Joanneum, and the eHealth Institute, and now I'm also a scientific stakeholder manager for Biobank. Yeah, my statement is also up already. In fact, actually, it's kind of 3 statements, and they are touching a point what we just heard before on the statement before, that the most problems from technical side we had, of course, with the devices and technology at the patient's home, so to say. And here we have several learnings, which you can see in the paper and also on the homepage. And to summarize them or to touch them, it's important, first of all, to provide a proper training, maybe also to think in a direction that trial sites as well as the study team, so to say, needs to be better prepared, let's say, to use this technology. Maybe this also shift a bit in the focus of education and employment and so on, possibly. In this regard, also, we felt it was very important that these personnel have devices at home, can try these things out, to have this learning. We discussed also a lot the bring your own device method, which we applied in the trial, which caused a lot of problems. So I think here, from technology side, we need to be very clear on the capacities or the requirements on the technical stuff, which the patients bring themselves, so to say, operation system, devices, and so on. And here, I mean, I think it's partially done already. It would be helpful, of course, we would say that in the trial, we have a pre-period where we measure digital data already to see the data quality as well as the usability and the handling of the devices before we actually start the real data collection and the trial itself.
Thank you, Stan. So a lot to do on the technological side before you actually start.
I would say so, but I think we should be positive. It will only get better from now on. So I would not limit our trials to 1, 2 DCT elements. We should more see our interesting years we live now as a transition phase and push towards also a better satisfaction for the participants and everyone. So I would be positive on that side.
Yeah, and maybe if we have a minute during the Q&A, I'd love to hear about 1 or 2 of the specific technical challenges. It would be interesting.
So now, Isla's statement on roles and responsibilities.
Thank you. I'm Professor Isla Mackenzie from the University of Dundee in Scotland. I'm a professor of cardiovascular medicine, and even before I became involved in trials at home, we had been running large clinical trials with decentralised elements for a number of years. So in this project, I was the Work Package 1 academic lead. So that was the work package looking at best practices in decentralised clinical trials. So I'm going to talk on the recommendation about agreeing and defining roles and responsibilities clearly and ensuring oversight mechanisms are in place. So I've always enjoyed problem-solving complex puzzles, and I see running a large clinical trial with thousands of staff involved, thousands of patients involved, multiple sites, sometimes multiple countries, as a really interesting and challenging intellectual problem to solve. And I think that having clearly defined roles and responsibilities for all of the people involved, whether it's staff or participants, is really important in terms of making sure that your trial will run smoothly, and it's possible to avoid many problems if those roles and responsibilities are really clearly defined at the start. So if we think about the participant in a trial, they want to know clearly and understand clearly what would be expected if they were to want to participate in the trial. And I think with decentralised trials, sometimes we're putting more burden onto the participants in terms of they assume the responsibility for entering data about themselves, for complying with visits that might be online rather than in attendance in a hospital where somebody goes through everything with them in person. And I think it's really important that everyone from the start knows exactly what they would do if they take part in the trial. Equally, you don't want tasks to get lost between different staff members. They need to be really sure who's doing what. And then if we move on to talk about oversight, the chief investigator or principal investigator has exactly the same responsibilities for oversight of the trial as they would if it wasn't decentralised. So patient safety, making sure that all the staff are doing what they should be doing, that they're trained to do what they should be doing. And I think that the oversight can be excellent in decentralised clinical trials, because if you have good data systems and you have good oversight of what's happening in your whole trial, some of these data systems can actually make it easier than if you're doing it in a more traditional way, relying on multiple individuals with less oversight. So oversight, again, you have to ensure it's in place. And I think that overall, having all of this sorted out at the very early stage of the trial is really important to make your trial run well and to have the outcome you want. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Isla. I would say, just because I was the co-lead with you on this, and when we looked at a lot of our case studies early on, I think we as an overall industry, and I don't mean just as sponsors, but altogether as an industry, tend to oversimplify things a little bit too much. And the case studies really showed that we weren't getting to the level of detail of exactly how things would flow and who would be responsible for what enough when we were introducing these new elements.
So with that, Megan, can you elaborate on recruitment?
Yes, Mira, thank you. So I'm Megan Heath. I was the industry lead in Work Package 3, Work Package Pilot. That's the working group that embedded the radial study and partnered with Mira in leading that working group. And I actually like Sten's statement that it can only get better from here. We all know that recruiting patients is the longest part of a clinical trial. It's the place where we struggle repeatedly, regardless of the model, whether it's conventional or hybrid or fully remote. We did some preference work within Work Package 3, and it was clear that actually the participants prefer hybrid or remote. So we should have, therefore, seen a higher recruitment in the hybrid and remote mode, but we didn't. And that was the biggest learning for us, probably, and recommendation. We had a number of patients, almost as high as 70% of the participants dropped out of the screening process in the remote piece where it came to questioning sharing their own data. So there's definitely a confidence issue that we need to address with participants when they look to engage in clinical research online. But we were also very aware of the ability to reach patients and the type of searches that they did and the language that they used, and we got a much better response from a paid research than we did from the broad stroke sort of Google type high contribution volume research piece. So I think in a nutshell for me there is so much still to learn on participant behaviour, what language they use, how they search, how they behave, and what their confidence is and trust is in clinical research, that we've got a long way in future work to go there.
Yes, thank you, Megan. And there's quite some projects going on again on recruitment, right? And we still need that, indeed. João, from a patient perspective, could I ask you to elaborate as well?
Thank you. I'm João Nabais, I'm Portuguese. I'm a patient expert panel member representing the International Diabetes Federation European region. I'm a chemist by profession, and I'm highly passionate for diabetes, mainly in public affairs and advocating for youngsters in diabetes. Can you pick up the red and green stuff? Imagine that people from the bar is about to offer you a drink without asking which drink you would like to have. Do you think it's proper or not? Can you put the green or red? You see? That's the point. All of you think it's red. All of you think it's not proper. So why should a clinical trial, which includes patients, participants, not including the patient preferences? Does it make any sense? No, it does not. Following what Megan was saying, the co-creation process is something that all of us should do, because if you use a co-creation process, in a way, it's easier to recruit people and to retain people. In my laptop is something that says, nothing about us without us. That's the clear answer for that question. And of course, not only the preferences, but also the needs. I know it's a challenge. Each one of us, as a person, have different needs, different preferences. So in a way, the golden bullet is to find a process where individual preferences and needs are featured into the process. It's not easy. It's a problem, but we need to take care of it, because if you do so, we will be more successful in conducting clinical trials, because at the end of the day, we all want to have successful clinical trials that benefit the community as a whole. So please do involve patients since scratch, not end of the process, in the really co-creation process.
Thank you. A very important point, and it's really nice that also as part of Trials at Home we're looking into, we had a lot of patient input in our project, but also trying to disseminate what went well and what didn't, so that we can improve that. And I think we should also do that for clinical trials, not only involve patients early, but also think about how can we do it better. So thank you so much. And then last but not least, Reamonn, on a slightly broader topic than just decentralization. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to have you all here today and be able to talk to you about the Trials at Home initiative. I'm Reamonn Madden. I'm from Novartis. I live in Dublin. And yeah, I threw a bit of a curveball in here because it's not really a recommendation so much as a reflection on the importance of how these recommendations came about. Because it's important to mention it, as it says here, followed a co-creative, multi-stakeholder approach. So when you're in this industry for a long time, you see a lot of recommendations come from a lot of different places. So you're probably going to ask yourself, well, what's different about these ones, right? I've heard similar things elsewhere. But what's different is that this has come from a multi-stakeholder group. It's not just one voice pushing their own agenda. This is without particular bias. All right, we want to see it succeed. There's a bit of a bias there. But actually, when you read through the recommendations, it's the good and the bad. There's no commercial agenda there. It's really trying to lay down exactly what was done, and what was done by people that have that lived experience as well. So the people that have written these recommendations, they're not separate to the project. People that have been involved have manned the help desk. They've built the tools. They've seen the patients. And you can also see that not just in the recommendations themselves, but as was mentioned, the depth of the publications as well. There's papers that have been published throughout and are going to be published throughout the next couple of months as well. And in that, you really can get down into the detail, right? But what's also striking about these recommendations and why they're quite different from other recommendations and really are important is that when you read through them, you realize it's also a little bit about the people, right? So what struck me about some of these was, if I talk about one of the recommendations or aspects of it, was the simplify piece, right? And we always say that's simplify. We say it's not easy. But if you read through the recommendations, there's a nice bit in there that actually talks about the emotional aspect. So we know that we want to do the best for patients. We want to simplify, but we know that's not easy. It's often not even possible. But there's a nice bit in there that talks about make sure you're able to build resilience, adaptability, building good communication, make sure you have those relationships. So a lot of these recommendations are obviously what you can do, but importantly at the heart of that is how you work together to make those recommendations a success as well. So to end on that, I'll hand back to Kim and Mira.
Can I just say one thing? Trials at Home is the best practice example of including patients since the beginning. I've been involved in many projects, and I can tell you that Trials at Home is really a best practice example of including patients from the beginning, because we were involved since the beginning of the project, and thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, very, very nice way to end the discussion. Thank you. And we didn't even bribe you.
So with that, you heard some of the recommendations. Hopefully you read more of them online. And we want to open the floor for discussion with our panelists on the statements they made, also online.
Hey, I have a question to Sten. So you mentioned issues with bring your own device approach. Could you tell a little bit more about this and what are your recommendations there? And what kind of devices we are talking about?
Thank you for the question. The devices the participants brought to the study was the mobile phone, very simple. And we needed to connect two devices, glucometer and a smart Maya pen, to these devices. And the problems we had were, problems we actually all we know from our earphones or whatever, were connection issues. And the thing is that many distributors of devices have already a blacklist on phones, so you cannot imagine when you start a trial which kind of phones participants bring from the hardware as well as the software, and this makes it very complicated to cover all the cases. So actually at some point we needed to black out or could not take some phones anymore in the study. There, of course, I know that in literature several approaches are discussed. You can hand out phones. Another problem can come with these problems because then the participants have two phones, their private ones and a study phone. It's very simple, but I think this is the reality we still face with connecting devices to the phone. And then, of course, we should not forget that you can test these things a lot, and you can have people who show these things. At the end, the participants are alone at home and need to make these things working, and this is, I think, a big difference compared to when they are at study site or in hospital.
I think just to add, if I may, there were a few moments in Trials at Home where we were a little bit shocked, I think, by some of the findings there or challenges that we came up against. And one of them was simply mobile phones. You could assume that in Europe, the majority of people carry an iPhone or, a reputable Samsung or something. And when you actually map across Europe, that's not true. And there are some some mobile phone types in some countries in Europe that I had never heard of that we couldn't actually connect with. So it was really surprising when you think here everybody would have a mobile phone and it would be easy. It wasn't easy.
Yeah, so there are advantages of a bring your own device study, right? But then you really need to map clearly up front where you're going to do that study, what types of phones will be used. And I think working together with the designers of the trial and the technology developers at a very early stage on seeing whether you can reach that connectivity for all of those phones or whether that's going to be a challenge, and then you need to provide devices.
Yeah. At some point, I mean, not too serious, but we discussed even in the tech work package if we would need to put technical requirements in the inclusion criteria, so to say. Which would of course exclude many people from the trial, so this can also not the way to approach. But maybe what I like in this thinking a bit is that at least in these years, technology is an important part for these elements, and then maybe we need to also to consider what not the patient, if the patient fulfills the inclusion criteria, but also the technology.
I have a question, and anybody in the panel may answer it. I was triggered by the comment about the mobiles. EU is built on very high ethical standards. And that means that the EU and any member state is committed to procure that also vulnerable groups and disabled persons are included in healthcare and the research. Disabled persons are also persons with a visual limitation. So how has that been procured? And if not, how could we improve that also these persons are included in DCTs? Thank you.
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I think it's an important aspect, right? Because the whole aspect of DCT is inclusivity. We're trying to get to the patient, right? And I look at this in a slightly different way. And that's what we're doing at the minute is exclusionary, right? Because you're actually excluding a huge number of patients that don't have the mobility to get into a clinic. They don't have the access to, as you said, if they've got visual difficulties, whereas technology can help. You know, you can use, the zoom in functionality or text to speech. So I think what's important there is to kind of not look at DCT as an additional burden, but it's really opening the door. And I think quite often what we don't do is we don't step back and question, well, who are we excluding at the minute? And we're excluding so many people because we don't do what's right for them and we don't bring the trial to them. Most patients aren't willing to travel more than 30 minutes to a site, right? That's a huge number of patients. And if you're a patient that has discomfort or a chronic disease, that you're not comfortable sitting in a waiting room for an hour, 2 hours over the course of the day, or there's assessments that are quite painful, like a biopsy or whatever else. Now, not that we do biopsies at home, but maybe we could do it closer to the patient. Maybe you don't want to have to travel back from that clinic. So when the technology comes in or DCT comes in, it's really talking about being more accessible to those groups of patients that don't have the mobility, don't have the access because they're too far away, but also don't have the time. And we see that a lot with the socioeconomic side of things. People have to work, they have to make money, but a trial takes time as well. So I think when we talk about decentralized clinical trials, it's broadening that reach. And yes, on the technology side, we have to be very careful about how it's designed, being user-friendly, but actually it's an enabler of being part of a clinical trial because there's a lot more kind of accessibility ways of, as I said, scaling, text-to-speech that you wouldn't have available otherwise. So that's my take.
Sorry, I just want to applaud you for the remark and the question because I think it's good to highlight. I do think as a group of trialists, so we say that often we don't dig deep enough with the participant and the patient to understand what's possible and how they're motivated. And I can give a personal story. My mother has wet macular disease. So, you know, your question resonates totally with me. I am absolutely blown away by what she can do with her mobile phone that I never knew I could do with my mobile phone. So, you know, she can get on and off buses. She can ask her phone to direct her to all sorts of places. She's expert at 83, using Siri in a way that I would never use Siri. But I think it's incumbent on us when we're designing trials to actually train ourselves in what's possible with the technology and have the patient at the heart or the participant at the heart of how we're designing it in the first place. And we don't do enough of it, simply.
Yes, I agree with it, of course. And again, it comes to the patient preferences and needs. It's a balance. We are talking about DCTs, which is, I think, is the way forward, definitely. But then if you had somebody at home does not deal with technology. In this I think it was yesterday or 2 days before, I saw a new trend, which is stop using smartphones because we want to be disconnected. So restart using old phones without any internet whatsoever. That's a trend is now popping up. So it's another challenge to DCTs. But again, we had a discussion, interesting session, I think it was in Spain, in Valencia, about the mobile phones. Should we buy people a new mobile phone to use for the study or not? I mean, it's a good discussion, but then at the end of the day, we should provide the patients at home what they need, with that specific person needs to be in the trial. For me, that's the aim of it.
Hi, I have a question. I'm not sure who to address, maybe all of you a bit, maybe Megan, because it's about patient recruitment. My focus area is much about diversity and inclusion in clinical trials. And I was curious because I know you have been looking into demographics as well, some diversity dimensions. And if you could see any, if you could draw any conclusion, or if not, any trends when it comes to the inclusion of diverse patient populations, given the 3 different trial settings.
You want to take it? Oops, sorry. Do you want to take it?
Okay, I'll take this one. So, so in radial, indeed, we really wanted to look into do we see a difference in diversity between Part A and Part B? So we had Part A, which was site-based recruitment. Those patients were then randomized into a hybrid and a conventional arm, and Part B, which was the fully remote arm. Unfortunately, and Megan already talked to that, although we saw a clear preference in the same population for remote recruitment, we recruited very few participants into the remote arm here. So we couldn't do that full analysis on all those diversity elements that we collected. What we did see is that the few participants that were in the fully remote arm, they were from much farther away from the sites, the remote sites, than the conventional ones. But we don't want to draw very hard conclusions on what that means. It does mean that you can recruit patients that do not live near to the site and that they're willing to do that if the site is far away. But that's about it for radial. Luckily, we have follow-up projects where we can look into that in more detail, right? Such as the READY project, which is really looking into diversity in clinical trials.
Yeah, and we also have the emerging markets data, which is slightly different, but 2 key. We're looking at Brazil and African continent in terms of implementation of DCT methodologies, and that might give us some indication of whether we can get greater diversity there.
2 questions. Yeah. I saw some other hands before that are gone now. I don't know whether that means that your questions have been answered.
We have some here. Yeah.
She's first there and then
Hello, I'm Fiona Radser from the Sustainable Healthcare Coalition. Congratulations first on what you've achieved. It's quite amazing, and it's wonderful to be here to celebrate that landmark. I was curious, really, Isla, about what you mentioned around the accountability and roles and responsibilities and being really clear. But because you mentioned being shocked at some of the findings. I mean, personally, I was really shocked to hear that that's a necessary recommendation, because it just strikes me that when you're conducting a clinical trial, that should be the very least that should be in place. And I'm interested in sustainability, as you might guess from the name of my organisation. And I wondered what the consequences of that would be, because there must be huge waste, huge inefficiency, and potentially even putting people at risk.
Yep, so I think the important point when we're thinking of decentralised clinical trials is that we have disrupted the way things were done in the past. So people have a long-term familiarity with roles and responsibilities in traditional clinical trials. But in these newer ways of doing things, we might shift those roles and responsibilities. And if you're not entirely clear at the start, people might assume they're being done in the old-fashioned way by someone else. So there is a risk there could be gaps. But there shouldn't be any gaps, and there can't be any gaps because of patient safety and oversight. The second part of your question regarding sustainability.
Really about waste. I mean, what the consequences are in terms of waste, for example, in inefficiency.
Yeah. So clinical trials, as you all know if you're involved in the field, cost huge amounts of money, particularly the industry-led clinical trials. So any problems with the trial lead to huge inefficiencies, waste as well, but also cost and time. And any time wasted is additional time before new interventions reach the patient community that they're intended for. So I think eliminating and reducing waste of time, resource, materials within trials is essential. And it's a totally different topic in some ways, but we are also looking at carbon footprinting and how we can make these trials more efficient in terms of not adding to the carbon footprint as much as we currently do. And I think decentralised clinical trials with some adaptations and not doing things the old way, and we're still not there yet, we could get there. Thank you for your question.
Well, I give a concrete example of where we really struggled. IMP, and we all know it. We think we can do direct-to-patient IMP in all countries across Europe, and in actual fact we can't. So in some countries they insist it goes through a central pharmacy, in some countries they insist that it's actually going through the pharmacy of a site within the country. So we ended up implementing a multi-layered model. We also looked at, in the decentralised mode, we looked at what would the patient receive at home if they were in the remote arm, and we thought it would be helpful to put all the material in one box. So we took the lab sample kits, we took the pregnancy test kit, we took the diabetes HbA1c kits, etc., and we put them all in a box and we tried to ship them to the patient. In a normal study, the vendor or the supplier owns the import and export and records for that process. As soon as we packed everything into one box, suddenly they didn't want to assure what was in the box and what was being shipped. So we had this gap in the responsibility of who is going to become the importer and exporter of records for a box when we simply wanted to make the life of the participant easier. And it was very, very complicated. So I think that speaks to where you might be surprised by the roles and responsibilities that you assume in a study that then don't happen when you do something to make the life of the participant easier.
And your example is a good one of then sustainability, because that you lose time.
We lost time. We also had to look at with the IMP situation whether we needed overage for the remote participants so they didn't run out of product. So where we thought that actually getting it there on time would save us and have less waste, we actually had to add overage to that. So it was very complicated, so it's not as straightforward as lots of surprises and lots of learning.
Here and here?
Yeah, my question was just stolen, but I can a bit add on to it, because I had also a question to Isla, and it was also specifically for the roles and responsibilities, because indeed I agree, in usual clinical trials you address all the roles and responsibilities, and indeed, as you were saying, it's a bit disrupted in a decentralized clinical trial, and Megan also already spoke to that, but I think also very specifically for vendors that you use, for example, again, the decentralized pharmacy, we are used to shipping the medication towards a pharmacy, and we are used to monitor there. So a CRA goes there, is everything done correctly? But with the use of vendors, we say, okay, but we audited them. So what is your opinion on the roles and responsibilities there? And yeah, how should we remain and keep that oversight? So yeah, the change of a site responsibility to a vendor which has been chosen not by the site but by the whole consortium in this case, or by the whole by the sponsor.
Yeah, I mean, you still have to fulfill all your obligations for monitoring of what happens to that investigational medicinal product. I'm not sure I can comment much further because you have to establish a process that will assess how much drug comes back, whether the returns are done. If you want to measure adherence, there's other ways of doing it, but you still have to follow your responsibilities and obligations, however you institute that. So you just need to make sure you build in a system. I mean, in one of our previous trials, we were the research pharmacy that sent investigational medicinal product directly through patients' letterboxes in the UK and in Denmark. And that worked really well. And we had an accountability system that we had set up ourselves with receipts and returns. So as long as you set up a system and it is clear who's doing what, you can still do it. It's just practicalities and logistics.
And I think, Isla, your point about it's different practicalities, right? Because now it sometimes sounds like, oh, it's all much more complicated. But I completely agree. It's because we haven't been doing this for how many years? We're doing this for the first time. And sometimes, especially with, for example, radial, we incorporated 7 decentralized elements into one trial to get as much learnings out of it as possible. And then sometimes you realize that, oh yes, we now have a central pharmacy. How are we dealing with these responsibilities? And I think that's why it's so important that we're standing here today, because these are the challenges and these are our findings that we need to share so that other people don't have to reinvent the wheel and have learned from, well, it could be our mistakes or at least the things we didn't think of while setting up the trial. So I think that's really important. And I think maybe in I don't know how many years time we will say, oh, yeah, but this is the way we always do this. So why is there a challenge? But we're not quite there yet. Yes.
Yeah, Thierry Scudier from the Pistoia Alliance. So thank you for organizing the event. I have a quick question on, I know clinical trials is all about standardization. We tend to over-standardize, then we struggle to find patients. So how far do you think, or how close are we to suggest to patients à la carte choice when they are coming to sign informed consent? I'm not talking, of course, about the randomization. No one will choose the placebo. But to offer the patient, you prefer to stay at home, you prefer to come to the hospital for regulatory acceptance, I mean, when you will submit the data.
I cannot answer this question, how close we are, but I can just, walk through what we did now. And we did not offer this a la carte for anyone. And we had like an extensive interaction, both formal and informal, with regulators to understand what we could do, also for very simplistic things. So how close we are, I don't know, even from a company that if we're offering that to some extent yet, but maybe Isla can share her experience.
I can add a comment. We have managed to do this in some trials. For example, with the follow-up in the All Heart study, we offered people, do you want to do this by email, by a postal method, or by a telephone call? So patients were allowed to choose how they wanted to be followed up in this long-term trial. And that choice changed gradually over the years. More and more wanted to do it online, which was helpful. It was more efficient, easier, quicker. And I suspect nowadays, if we started another one with that choice, almost everyone might choose to do it online. But you still have to be able to cater for the people who need some help on the phone maybe, or with eyesight problems, disabilities, that just want to do it a different way. And personally, I think wherever you can build in flexibility and choice, you probably should. There are concerns that you might be collecting data slightly differently, and that obviously is a concern for the trialists and the data quality. But I think there are some things you can give choice. There might be a few that you just can't, and we have to accept that.
Just one add, the trial that you shared, if we're talking about doing trials, and I think it's a difference if you're doing a trial in a single country or if you're doing a trial in Europe, which involves many countries. So not only about comparing the data, but also accounting for national variation in what you can do. So I think there's an added complexity there. Sorry.
Before passing to my yes, I have my mic in my hand. So, yeah, I was a member of the ethical committee for clinical trials in Portugal. It was I finished my mandate 3 years ago, I think. We had an interesting discussion back then about the electronic signatures, which is simple as that. And the world and the decentralized trials are moving much faster pace than, some ethical committees are. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge per country, I would say. Because, of course, I do believe in giving the patient the preference, the choice. But then I do realize, being a scientist myself, that does include some elements which are not controlled in a way, and you might not have the comparable data. So I would love to have a system where the patient will say, I want to be on the remote or on the fully remote or whatever. But yeah, I understand it's not easy to accomplish.
Yeah, I think maybe to summarise what everybody said there, because what I was going to say is covered. But at Novartis, we kind of aspired 5-6 years ago to say you will put decentralized clinical trial elements as the default choice, right? But reality is not that way, right? I mentioned biopsy. You can't do that at home. There's going to be certain things that have to be done at home. And a lot of that's driven by the regulations, but it's also driven by the actual practicalities as well. So the idea is offering the choice. I don't think necessarily for most innovative trials, innovative products, where you don't have the safety profile nailed down, because safety is key. You don't necessarily have the data that says that you can ship the product. You're not going to be able to do those visits at home, the dosing visits at home, for example. But what we can do is, where it is possible, make that active choice to make it the default. So if there isn't a drug shipment, there isn't an assessment that has to be done on site. Physical exams is a good example of that. A lot of doctors have to do the physical exams, and that excludes a lot of the visits that you could actually do remotely. But I think what we're doing here is really kind of identifying where that value is and giving the a la choice or a la carte choice that actually makes a difference to the patient. It's not just putting it in because it's nice to have, but it actually makes a value difference.
So what we saw in Radial is basically that we had to set up 3 different trials. So, and then for sites that need to tailor to that. So I completely agree that where you can build in flexibility, we should try and do it. But we also should consider what that means for the site. Is that easy, or is that basically running 2 trials in one? And it really depends on how you do it. So Isla had a very good example where that was very feasible. But sometimes the way we set that up, it may not be that feasible. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And the other one about the data, I do agree that there's then the challenge, is the data then comparable? But I think we should not overestimate that if we do a paper questionnaire in 15 European countries, that's filled in the same in all of those countries. So I think we shouldn't overestimate the comparability of data collection if you do it in a similar way, if it's in different countries where different methods are, for example, more accepted. So I think we always should challenge the status quo there and really think about, is the data collection really different? Or is that an assumption that we're making?
Sorry, I'm just going to add as well. Just one last thought, because I do. It's an ideal world where patients can have the choice and pick the best thing that is for them. There is, it's a very regulated industry for very good reasons, and the endpoints that we need to use to prove safety and efficacy, to some extent, in some diseases, are a bit outdated. And so for me, really working hand in hand with the regulators to see how we can update those and change those and make those endpoints that are truly meaningful for patients. So not asking them, how did you feel over the last month? But maybe collecting data on a continuous basis to see how they're sleeping, how they're itching, how they're coughing, and how that's really impacting their day-to-day life. But that's going to be a work in progress, hand in hand with regulators, to make those changes.
And before we go to our next question, the live audience, and I know there's still questions, are there any questions from the online audience? Because we can't see that here. So I'm looking at, no questions there. Then we'll continue here live in the room.
Yeah, because I think you've had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's Scotty Kern. I work for the Critical Path Institute, which you might not have heard of, but it's a US-based entity that does public-private partnerships. That's what we do. I lead a consortium as my day job, so you have my deepest respect in actually finishing something. I had a question I'd like to target to Helga, if I may, because I'm a fan of Trials at Home. I have no involvement in it at all. I've been watching from the sidelines since Kai introduced me to it a long time ago. And I hear a lot of reflection on what the sponsor, the clinical trial community, the vendors involved in the process, the academics that might be involved, what they're learning from this. But one of the things I was kind of hoping for from this is centrally funded, there's funding from the EU. So what are the regulators learning from this? And what you reference within the DCT guidance, that nation state is one of the most impactful pieces of paper I've ever looked at, because it just shows how complex things are and what needs to change. So my question is, do you or others within the initiative think that the regulators are actually learning from this? Because DCT is one component of how things are difficult in the approval space. But this is funded, in part at least, by EU. Are you seeing any sense of awareness that this is how ridiculous this is?
Well, I can confirm that they're learning a lot from this, because we work in academia quite closely with the regulators. And just to give insights from the Trials at Home project, because we publish and we do these reports and these deliverables, but I have to say we were frequently invited for conversations. We were frequently asked to, share what we had learned so far. For example, when they were doing ICH E6, the third division of that, because they were thinking about the annex of the DCTs, they really listened to what we had to say and what our experiences were. So I think that's really impact. Also, ACT EU, we sit there, we discuss what we've learned along the way. And I think many of the maybe academic projects that we did within Trials at Home, so not necessarily designing the trial, we went into all kinds of assessment, making a mock ethics review with people from ethics that need to consider those. So you not only expose them to the problems that we were dealing with and learn from them, what they see as opportunities and not. And the same on the regulatory side. So I think in this project, we really, from the start, we were very engaged. And I think, how do they learn? I mean, industry is very innovative and tech, and the rest needs to learn and understand what they do and what they implement. So on the regulatory side, they also need to, understand better how you set up things, how you measure things, so they can, estimate what are the, what are the risks or what are not the risks when they are looking at how you present those. So I think through these type of projects, which are funded with Open, we have a chance to do that. I mean, I think it's differently in a normal sponsor-regulator relationship than what we are doing here. And I think, this publicly funded project really are a unique opportunity to really engage and openly discuss, also with industry at the table. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I believe that we managed to have some impacts on what the regulators learned on DCTs.
Yeah. Just a spoiler: we've got block 3 panel. This has died on me.
No, it works.
It's here. Yeah. So and Monique, not to call you out, but you're sitting right there now. This afternoon we will look at external. So we've got an internal panel here, but this afternoon we'll look at external stakeholders and what they learn from Trials at Home. And you can ask the same question then. We'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay. Before my question gets stolen, I get to ask it. Great. I have 2 questions. One is on the regulatory as well, not so original anymore. But that one is about, do you have any key learnings on how to be regulatory ready with the evidence you're collecting, especially when it's like decentralized elements, technologies implemented? Are there anything that you would watch out for or learned along the way compared to traditional? And the other question, completely unrelated, what was the driver for less recruitment on the remote? Maybe it's just technicalities, but you mentioned it, so I had to ask.
Well, I can maybe answer your first question. I don't think it's very different from DCTs as conventional trials. I think, early engagement is really important if you want to foresee problems, if you're doing something new. I think, that's what we really did, and I think that was very helpful. We learned a lot about what we could and could not do. So we went to the ITF, we had scientific advice, we had informal engagement. So I think that without regards to what you're doing really is helpful if you're not sure about what's possible and what not. So very short for the recruitment.
We were very bold in Trials at Home. We made the assumption at the beginning that we could have one remote site per country. I mean, why not? They could be completely remote. So we ran into lots of challenges with some of the sites and their ability to recruit, even to get started. So that limited us. And then, as I said earlier, with some of the language we were using, some of the searching we were using wasn't as impactful as it might have been in the remote arm. So lots of learning there. I think we could do it better next time for sure. But yeah, we limited ourselves a little bit by challenging to say we'll just have one site per country in the remote arm.
Yeah, and I think maybe an additional learning we had is that we had a really amazing landing page for the site, but it was the same in all countries, and it was not linked to a trusted institute in that country for the participants. So I think that's also something that we do differently next time. So those trusted sites were there in the back, but they weren't visible immediately when you saw the communication around the trial. So that's definitely a learning as well. I see we have 6 minutes left on the clock, and we have online a question.
So we have a question online from Doug. Thank you, Doug. It seems the radial platform performed well across remote and hybrid use, but integration with other technologies caused the greatest friction. What's the best way to address that dependency in next generation DCT technologies and designs?
Can you repeat, Petra, please? I didn't fully understood. Wow. Friction between what?
But integration with the other technologies caused the greatest friction.
Yeah.
So it performed well across remote and hybrid use, but created friction with other technologies. I think he's referring to the fact that the use of...
I got it, yeah. I mean, part of the story also of radio was that we on purpose integrated different technologies and software solutions as well as hardware into this trial. But of course, in the selection of the criteria, there were vendors which were offered to provide and do all the technology in one set. But it was, of course, intentionally done in radio to have these learnings. So we had from the beginning the challenge to integrate devices from different vendors. What I personally hope what helps in future is that the interoperability is processing regarding connection and data exchange, also data quality at some point, of course. And then, of course, that these things are well tested and suitable for clinical trials, which was also kind of difficult to evaluate, which should be done in future trials. So if you take a technology from a third-party vendor, that you get the proof and the data and the documents that these devices have been used already in a broader scale in clinical trials. So I think this could solve a lot of problems, and I hope also from technology point of view, for better development and learnings and better integrations on usability, as well as from the technical point of view. For the future.
And from the patient point of view as well, because if everything not running smoothly, if the devices don't talk to each other, if there is no interoperability, we will going to lose people. all of us, think about yourselves. If you are at home using a device that is not connected to other device, you might shut into yourself and stop using that device. At least I do that, so.
Are there other questions online, Petra?
Online, yeah.
So another question online from Caroline. Thank you. Do you think it would have made a difference to have a regulator directly part of the public-private partnership as a project member?
I can take. We did not have a regulator as a direct partner, but we had an advisory board with regulators in it, which we consulted on all our deliverables, which was consulted on specific questions. So although they were not a partner, they were a part of the project, in my opinion.
So we have room for one more question from the audience. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'm Mark Sheehan from Oxford. Just a general question about the recommendations across them. One of the things that seems to have come up from this morning is that there's sort of two kinds of resistance to being able to do the DCTs. One is a kind of status quo conservatism, resistance to change. And the other one is just a lack of knowledge about how to do this. And so I was curious as to whether or not you thought the recommendations and the ways in which you're understanding them addressed those two different things differently, so that one of them, that they might more focus on, as it were, a hearts and minds or culture thing, and others more about the details of implementation.
From my, I'm wondering if you, because it's an overarching recommendation question, so I was looking, do you want to cover this, or do you want us all to comment on ours?
No, I'm happy to comment on it. I just, I don't want to take that opportunity away from the panel. So, yeah, so I think what we really try to do with the recommendations is make them practical, so that it's of course we also have the high overarching recommendations, but we thought that a lot of the learnings are on how do you do this operationally. That's indeed a key part where we really have to learn from each other. So I would say a lot of our recommendations are on that, but then adding that you cannot do that if you don't involve stakeholders early on, and if you don't. So we didn't separate them out as such. But I think you're absolutely right, and we might need to add that to our website, that those are two very important streams of recommendations on the website. I think the first one, sharing on practical experiences so that people can take them along, that's much easier than the second one, changing the views on decentralization, changing our opinions there. And I think that's where these meetings are for. That's why we also made a course for future possible participants, because interest comes with understanding what it's all about, and I think there's a big step to take there still. What is the decentralization? What does it mean for participants and for sites? And I think especially for the site piece, there's quite a lot to do still, and there's things that we haven't tackled within Trials at Home on how can we collaboratively make it easier for sites to do this and share best practices, and also build those digital capabilities that are needed for that. So I don't know whether you want to reflect on it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and I do feel like it was addressed a little bit in the panel, especially the second part around really making it personal for people, and I think we did pull as much of that out as we can. I know, Isla, you could speak to that a lot about really keeping the patient front and center, really thinking about the research question and being tailored. And I know Ray, you spoke to that a little bit as well. It's super important that we try to address that piece of it as well. And I think as you dig deeper into the materials, you'll see pieces of that pulled in as much as we possibly could.
And I think with that, We have to close the session.
Yeah, so we're going to just very quickly ask our panelists to just speak a little bit about where you think the future is. You know, where do you think that there's room for the next advancement in DCTs in a 30 second to 1 minute soundbite?
30 seconds. Well, I'm an academic, so what really, when I think about DCTs and the next questions that I would like to see answered or assessed, it's we are now using this tech, we are collecting all kinds of new real-world data. How are we going to use that for meaningful answers? How do we deal? We're seeing all kinds of different types of data for different types of endpoints. So I see DCTs, the data part is really for me the new exciting era that we will need to look and dive further into in 1 minute.
For me, I think the key next step is that we all use the knowledge we've obtained through this project and wider contacts to improve the participant experience. Because ultimately, if the participant doesn't want to take part in the trial or can't take part in the trial because it's too difficult to keep going, we lose that input. And I think just improving the participant experience is key to making trials successful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also academic and I come from the tech part, and I said before we should be positive and it will only get better from here. I think we live in an interesting time, not only in clinical trials, also in clinical research, where technology can open new borders on data quality, data collection, and insights into the patient's home. But I think we need to more make technology stable, involve the participants early to make it usable. Companies mostly have the pressure to come out with technology very early, but it shows that in home use, it's not so easy that at the end. All these things, but I'm already over 1 minute, so
I'll save time. It speaks a little bit about the patient and where are we and how long will we take to get there. For me, we'll stop talking about hybrid, remote and traditional, and we'll talk about trials and care, and it will be integrated into the standard of care of the patient. Anybody can join, and they won't see the difference.
Thank you. All of you make my life easy because we all talk about patient preferences, which I think is the way forward in the future. We did not approach one thing which is clearly the immediate future and our present, which is intelligence, artificial intelligence. And now these will become a key element on DCTs, because we are talking about I do believe that the face-to-face consults with the medical doctors and the researchers it's one of the key elements, of course. But then everything that we talked about here, the difficulties on technology, the difficulties on dealing with staff and at home, for instance, I think part of that problems will be solved with artificial intelligence.
Thanks. I have a mic, it's fine. I think short term what we're looking at is really off the basis of these recommendations and to the question here. What comes with trust is the willingness to do this. So I think what we'll see in the short term is a lot more of the stakeholders seeing that it can be done, it has been done, it's been well thought out. Hopefully a lot more harmonization from the regulators, and by that I actually mean the ethics committees, because there's still a big disconnect there, which means that we're able to do more of the a la carte type DCT approaches in the patient's home, right? Because people will buy into it, they can trust that we thought about this fully and we understand that we know how to do it. I think in the long term then what we're kind of looking at is closer, as was mentioned here, to the healthcare system itself. So bringing the child to the patient, but not necessarily in their home. So I think what we'll start to see is healthcare systems adopt their own ways of doing decentralized clinical trials and using the same principles. So, hub and spoke type models where you're part of a healthcare system, but you can be seen anywhere within that healthcare system. And that will be really facilitated, I think, through the learnings we've got here, because obviously those big institutions want to get it right as well.
So I think, the journey, right? That's where we started. But there's still obviously a long way to go. So just to thank the panelists very much for their time and their thoughts today.